Welcome back. Joining me today is Kirby Brownlow. He's the founder of Arcofire, an organization that helps former prisoners and anyone else who has had contact with the criminal justice system. Kirby is a former Army rifleman and a former prisoner himself. Today we're going to be talking about incarceration and people who have been incarcerated. So, you spent a fair bit of time in prison. So tell me, top 5 harmonica songs. Go.
Wow. Love Me Do, and I think there's one by the Doobie Brothers as well. But I don't see the relevance. There was never a harmonica in prison when I was there. I think you can probably pull them apart and find some metal.
So harmonica's fun. That's what we're looking for in prison. That's why they're not there. Okay, I understand. So a lot of people are new to the study of crime, but they don't know even the difference between a jail and a prison. What is that difference?
I think largely jails, or county jails as they call them in the US, would probably be similar to that of the remand centre here in Adelaide. They're processing facilities, so it's a one-stop shop for someone that maybe hasn't been in custody before, so they can assess behaviour, determine security ratings for that person. And obviously prisons are for sentenced people that have gone through the courts or might be on remand and have moved on from that jail phase.
Got it. So if you get first arrested, where do they put you?
I think largely it depends on where you're apprehended. It really does depend. I think here in South Australia, it would be the remand centre, potentially a police cells prior to that, and then maybe even Yatala because it's a high security facility.
Okay, let's talk about prison, where somebody's been sentenced for over a year. Let's talk about a high security prison like Yatala here in South Australia. Can you run us through what a day in the life for a prisoner would be?
Okay, sure. So in the mornings, you'll generally have something come over the PA or the tannoy that will say from the officers, stand by for unlock, make your beds, have yourselves cleaned, etc. And it's basically a bit of a warning order for inmates to get ready for the day. You get up, you make your bed. They'll crack the doors at about 8 a.m. or 7:45.
Those are the doors to your cell?
The steel doors. So
okay.
They have a master lock. They come and do a master lock unlock at about 6. You can hear them unlock it. And then they'll do the main unlock where everyone will be required to stand at the front of their cells with the doors closed, I believe. And that's just so they can do a head count. So if they're locked up with 40 inmates and there's 38 in the morning, well, it's likely to have jumped out the window. From there, there'll be a bit of a morning parade after the head count's done. They'll clear that head count and obviously report it through to the control room.
Hold on a second. What do you mean a morning parade? It doesn't sound like the kind of parade that I would like to be in, with floats and the rest of it.
No, you're right. It's corrections obviously have a duty of care to inmates. So if there's a morning parade, generally what they'll be looking for is their inmates that are in there, but they'll also be looking for signs of injury. So if someone comes out with a big shiner and that wasn't there before on the inmate, well then that black eye that inmate has is obviously the inmate might be in distress. He might have got into a bit of a fight overnight. So it's about corrections having a duty of care and just assessing the well-being of inmates in the morning. And this occurs about 3 times a day. So there's a midday parade and a lockdown parade at night. So, and it's all about counting. There's a lot of counting going on and standing by your door.
So after you have the morning parade, then what happens?
So generally what will occur is inmates will get mop buckets, have some breakfast like a coffee and some Weet-Bix, cereal, toast. They're your choices really. Once that's all done, so you're pretty much cleaning yourselves and breakfast in that sort of 20-minute space after unlock. And from there, they will do an inspection of the cells. So they'll be checking for cleanliness, they'll check for contraband, they'll look under beds, they'll make sure that there's the correct amount of property. For example, if an inmate has more than 4 sheets or 2 sheets, there might be questions as to why there's that many sheets, and that could be potentially self-harm as a ligature risk or using it to get out the window as a bit of a rope. So they're looking for drugs, they're looking for weapons, they're looking for anything that's contraband in the prison, really.
Okay, and then after that, do people go to work? Do they have jobs in a prison here in Australia?
It's interesting you say that, because I guess in the remand centre, there's not really a lot of options. It's more of The average stay is apparently 12 days. People have the option to go to the gym, read a book, and there's probably a 2 to 2.5 hour gap where your time is your own. In other prisons, you're right, there are work and study options. People might be doing TAFE courses, they might be doing clinical programs such as a violence prevention program and things like that. They may have medical appointments, dental. So, I mean, as a former inmate, I wanted to make sure that there was as many things in my day just to keep things going, because, as you know, idle hands are the devil's playground. So it was important to just keep, stimulating and going through that process. But largely, there is not a lot to do in prison. It is very boring. It's like 90% boring and 10% sheer terror sometimes.
Okay, so question. What's the best first play in dominoes?
I don't know. I played a lot of chess, a lot of Scrabble. Got pretty good at that. Got a few words across the Scrabble board that people weren't aware of, which is always good. But yeah, there's just the opportunity to, I guess, mingle and know who's in the unit is really important. There's 2 sets of rules in a prison where corrections have their standing orders, I guess, or such as counts, etc. But you've also got the unwritten rules, which is obviously that have been around as long as prisons have been around, really.
What are some of those rules that might not be so obvious, or what are some of the rules that are completely obvious?
Well, you don't really want to be having a conversation for an extended period of time with a corrections officer. You're going to get sort of red lit people might suspect that you might be giving intelligence or whatever to officers. So it's best to keep your interactions with officers really, really short, sharp and shiny. That's also an opportunity to go and put request forms in for, you might need to see the dentist, for example, or you might need a laundry bag. Because obviously if you've got about, I'd say 15 items that you're allowed to have, and sometimes if they get pinched or they're faulty or they get lost or whatever, you need to put request forms in for that. And you pretty much request for anything in prison through the officers.
What's nighttime like in prison?
Yeah, it's an interesting time. There's a piece to it, obviously, because you are generally in a cell with only one person, so it lowers the threat of any harm that could come to you. There's televisions. Obviously, it's free to air televisions. A lot of people watch, the news, etc. Read, write letters to their family. I guess prior to lockdowns, a whole bunch of stuff that you can do during the day. But once you're locked in, that's it. Everything that occurs overnight that you need to do will happen in that cell. So obviously your ablutions, showers, if you need to use the toilet, you're doing that in front of another inmate, which is a bit of a shock to some people. I'm fortunate that, being in the Defence Force, that, when you've got to go, you've got to go, and it's not a big deal. Some people, I guess there's a number 1 and a number 2 in a cell. Generally the number 1 or the senior inmate of a class would be on the bottom bunk, and they would sort of set a cell SOP, like cell rules. Mm-hmm. No shitting in the cell overnight, for example, or TV goes off at this time. And what I learned is that if I went into a cell with someone, I just I guess fall into whatever they're comfortable with. But then that will obviously change as you go through the system. You do more time, people get to know you. You're working out more in the gym, so to make yourself a bigger person, so you're less likely to be a target. But respect and being polite is a really, really big thing in prison.
And one of the things that I learned here is that nighttime starts really early.
It sure does, yeah. I think we're looking at 3:45, maybe even 4:30, and 5 o'clock's dinner, maybe even earlier than that. What will occur in a prison like Yatala, for example, is inmates will be locked in their cells, and then there'll be the billets that will go through the wings, and they'll issue hot water. Meals will come on a tray, and then, they're pretty basic meals. They'll go through a trap door. You eat your meal, and then once that's done, those plates, obviously, because in some cases they're ceramic, will go back through the traps. You'll be locked in for the night. They'll close the traps, and the officers will take off. They'll lock up another barrier as well, and then you're pretty much in there, overnight. And then the activities the 5 to 9 MacGyvers come out. And when I say the 5 to 9 MacGyvers, people are, slinging lines. It's well known that everyone's sort of doing what they're doing at night time, and it's good to be able to talk to people in the wing. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of joking going on, but there's also a lot of intimidation. Mm-hmm. That can be one of the most fearful points in prison, is when you're in your cell and someone may have a beef with you. Mm-hmm. Well, then they've got all night to be able to intimidate you. So in some cases, if one guy has an issue with another guy, he'll be telling that person what he's going to be doing to him in the morning. So there's an element of psychological warfare that comes with that type of behaviour. And in the morning, when the doors crack, sometimes things happen, and that's a daily occurrence in prisons, a daily occurrence. And it could be over something as, like an empty cup that someone takes. It can kick off over literally anything. Yeah.
Well, certainly looking forward to the night is not something that you do in prison. That's something that we have the privilege of doing when we're outside, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So one of the things that society tends to do is that society tends to band everyone with a serious conviction together, right? You've been in prison. You've met a lot of people with various different kinds of serious convictions. Do you think that's fair, to band them all into the same pool?
Not at all. I think, everyone's got different DNA. They're all different people at the end of the day. It's just, if we have a cookie cutter approach to looking at offenders, then I don't think it's appropriate. There's a different scale to offending. There might be someone in there for low level, drink driving, etc., and is not, an active member of the criminal community, but they're in there, to keep the community safe because they're driving on the road. You might have gang members, you might have people convicted of homicide. There's a literal pecking order in prison, from people that have assaulted women and rapists to gang members and armed robbers, and you can't look at a person that's in prison and typecast them all in the same boat, because at the end of the day, the offending's different, the person's different, the reasons why they offended are different as well. So I think for the media and people in the community to be typecasting people like this, it's not appropriate at all.
And I guess another thing that's different is the potential for people to be able to successfully re-enter society. That's what you dedicate your life to right now. Your job is helping people re-enter society after being incarcerated, among other things. Let me ask this question. Why should society allow people to re-enter after they've done something that's really wrong?
Well, that's a really good question. And I think, Rajiv, what it comes down to is the reasons why people go to prison. There's generally 4 reasons. One is, public safety. Obviously, if someone's an armed robber or they've been convicted of murder, taking them out of society and incapacitating them is a reason that they may go to jail. Another reason is justice for the victims. That person deserves to have some sort of, I guess, an eye for an eye. It's very Old Testament, but it's I guess it's there in these 4 reasons as to why people go. There is another one there, but the important point here is rehabilitation. And if people are going to prison, ideally we want them to be coming out, get shot out of the other end as better citizens. And I think that corrections departments around the world and justice departments need to do more. In many cases, people that are in prison, especially men, 60 to 70% of those people have experienced abuse and neglect. So they're already going into prison as people with trauma. They're experiencing something that might go for 2 or 3 years. There's a traumatic experience. And if there is no therapeutic intervention and appropriate rehabilitation, then we're really, really, we're not asking for, I guess the product of what we have at the end of the day is not really what we want.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's something that really surprises people, that a lot of people who end up getting incarcerated in their life have been victims of serious crimes and had really horrific experiences themselves. What are some of the impactful events that you've seen, either in your community, your life, among the people that you've served, that have changed folks' trajectories, in your view, and put them on the path to offending or being in positions where they're likely to get into trouble?
Okay. Well, as I mentioned before, Rajiv, trauma is a big thing. And broken people are going into prisons because they were hurt in their formative years. There's that saying that hurt people hurt people. So I think that trauma has a large part to play. A lot of crime is obviously opportunistic as well. For me, greed was a motivator, obviously being convicted of robbery. There's obviously people that actively want to have crime as a method of making money, and with organised crime. Some people may be addicted to drugs, for example, and maybe committing crimes in order to fund their drug habits. There's a wide range, and that's where we go back to what I said before about looking at the individual and as to why they are in prison. Because, for example, someone that has a psychiatric condition who kills someone may be different to someone who is addicted to drugs and is stealing televisions, for example. But what society, I guess, generally as a whole, and the media goes, they're just bad people, which, we all know is not true.
It's not a helpful way to frame those things, for
Yeah.
sure. And, like a lot of the things that you were talking about, they, to me, sound like public health problems, right? These are problems in terms of a health system, right? We know that there's deficits in terms of psychiatric care, mental health care. We know that there's a lot of difficulty in terms of accessing primary care, right? There's news events in terms of how primary medical care does not get given to people in various parts of society. For instance, Aboriginal people have difficulty accessing primary medical care, and it leads to really horrific outcomes, which seem to compound a lot of the traumas that that folks have experienced, right?
Yeah, certainly.
So since you've been released, you have been working a lot in terms of getting former prisoners integrated into society. You are intimately aware of how the criminal justice system works here in this country. If you were the all-powerful leader for a day and you could make a single change to the way that prisons work, what would that change be?
I think what needs to occur is for people with lived experience that obviously have proof of reformation in the community to be able to align themselves with existing services such as corrections or community corrections, for example. Now, whether that's in some sort of policy capacity or advocating for prisoners' rights, or in particular peer mentoring. So someone that's been there and done that, because in many cases people that are in prison, they'll listen to a social worker or a psychologist, for example, and there is a massive gap in terms of being able to form any relationship. However, if there's a peer that's been there and done that, they've done the time, they've been involved in a similar sort of world, those relationships can be formed very quickly. And we've seen this with Dr. Jill Buck's study on peer mentoring in criminal justice, that it works. I have been mentoring predominantly young men since 2017, and what I'm seeing is a reduction in them reoffending. They have their slip-ups, obviously, but I think it's a really positive sign that we could potentially look at having peer mentoring or even a peer advisor for programs like the violence prevention program, where you might have 10 men in a group with a social worker and a psychologist talking with these men and facilitating this 9-month program, which in many cases people are doing just to tick a box to get parole. So what percentage of that content from that program is actually sinking in? I believe that if you have a peer advisor, qualified, capable and ready to do the work as a peer advisor, and can be made accessible to this program, I think that program would be more effective. Because I've done the program and it was just chaotic. I think if there's a peer there that can say, well, hang on, this is actually what she's trying to say, or this is what he's trying to say about this particular issue. And if it's coming from a peer, then it's more likely to be received better.
So it's kind of like ensuring that people are able to communicate on a bandwidth that makes sense to them.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, Kirby, thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your thoughts with us today. I really appreciate you coming in to talk to me.
Thanks, Rajiv. Cheers.